How do you want to die? We have been walking with Jesus all week. We walked triumphantly into Jerusalem. We were there at the Last Supper, the washing of feet, the agony of the garden, the trial, the crucifixion. We have walked with Jesus as he prepared for his death and as he prepared his disciples for his death. And we have an image of Jesus there at the end on the cross, looking down, seeing his mother and the beloved disciple, realizing they needed each other and bringing them together, reconstituting the family, if you will. That's how Jesus died. How do you want to die? If you ask most people this question outside of the church, they will say they want to go to sleep one night and never wake up. They don't want any suffering. They don't want any pain. And they don't want to be a burden to anyone else. Yes, that's it. Quiet, quick, painless. That's how I want it to be. But it was not always like this. There was a time when Christians feared a quick death, when what Christians prayed for was the ability to prepare for their death, to prepare themselves to face their God, to prepare their families for their absence. Christians wanted time. That's how they wanted to die. How do you want to die? Some of you realize that my father died in the fall, and I was with him during his last week as we walked through stages of preparation, each stage seemingly more mystical than the one before. When I returned here to the cathedral, I actually had 2 funerals within the next week. And it feels as if that pace has not stopped. And I wasn't there with people that I didn't know. These were our people. These were people I had known and loved for 10, 12, 15 years. And I watched them prepare to die and to prepare their families to die. And they taught me something. How we die has a lot to do with how we have lived. How we die has a lot to do with how we have lived. These were church people. They had spent their life coming to church, saying their prayers, participating in the sacraments. They had been formed in the image of Christ. They had been serious about it. They had been intentional about it. And they had been transformed over many years of practice. And it mattered. It mattered with how they faced their suffering, their isolation, their pain. How they died had a lot to do with how they lived. This has been described very beautifully by Brother Lawrence, a 17th century Carmelite lay brother. He calls it the practice of the presence of God. The practice of the presence of God. Brother Lawrence went about his life learning how to find and be attentive to God. And even the most tedious of tasks, washing the dishes, sweeping the floor, opening the door. For Brother Lawrence, these were all opportunities to experience God's presence. He called it the practice of the presence of God. And he did it not because he was going to benefit from it. He didn't do it because he thought God would like him better, or that his stress level would be reduced, or that life would be more fun. He did it for the sake of loving God. That was his only motivation. And he knew that he would not avoid pain and suffering in his life. But he also knew that this practice, this awareness, this intentionality would prepare him for that moment. The only thing he truly feared was to be separated from God. And he wanted to be ready when the time came. I recently read a more contemporary example of this practice. It comes from Joseph Cardinal Bernardin, who was the Archbishop of Chicago. He ultimately died from pancreatic cancer, but used his last part of his life as a witness. And he wrote a book about it called The Gift of Grace. And as Bernardin tells his story, you can see Brother Lawrence's practice of the presence of God. Bernardin opens his book with a story of his fellow priests chastising him for not being attentive to his prayer life. Now, he was already 45 years old by this time, and a man of some power and status. Trust me, to have your fellow priest chastise you for not praying is a difficult, awkward moment. But he committed himself right there to engage in prayer for 1 hour every morning, to say the office, to pray the rosary, and he did for the rest of his life. He was the Archbishop of the largest Roman Catholic diocese in the United States. He was a man of world acclaim. He was a scholar. He was known, busy, sought after. But every day for an hour, he said his prayers, saying the office and praying the rosary. And then ultimately he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And he did what you do when you are diagnosed with cancer: surgeries, chemotherapy, radiation. He tells the story of recovering from his first surgery. It's a common story, really. A day in the ICU, back in your room. But the pain was too much for him. When people came to visit, he told them that he could not pray. All he could do was think about the pain. And his advice to them was, do your praying early. By the time you get here, you need to have already done your praying, because you won't be able to do it now. He had practiced the presence of God and had that formation to draw upon. He had that practice which connected him to God, to himself, and to other people. It was there when he needed it. I don't want you to think, however, that it was easy. Bernardin says, the biggest problem I had was letting go of control. Sound familiar? He said, I'm a powerful guy, and I like that power. I know what I want to happen, and I don't like giving up my control. I don't like acknowledging my pride. I don't like being chastised by others. I don't like letting God tell me what to do. But he did, one step at a time, slowly letting go of more and more and more. And this allowed him to deal with his life, with his death, as if it were part of his life. So when he entered into his battle with cancer, how he fought that battle became his witness, his ministry. He found himself engaging in a ministry with others who were suffering from cancer. He found himself establishing special services and administering sacraments to others who were sick, who were diseased, who were dying. This practice that he had engaged in for years, forming him in the image of Christ, now allowed him to stay connected to God, to himself, and to others, so that he was able to be a witness to God's love even at the end. So, how is it that you want to die? To go to sleep one night and have it end without pain and not being a burden, or have time to prepare for your death, yourself, your family, prepare to face God, continuing to have your life be a witness of God's love. My experience tells me that how we die has a lot to do with how we have lived. And that Brother Lawrence had it right when he talked about the practice of the presence of God. It's learning how to find God in our lives and be attentive to that power and presence in the smallest, most tedious, most mundane things of day-to-day life. God is there. To recognize it, to be attentive to it, to learn how to let it live in you, letting go of your ego so that God may shine through, will change you, transform you, gradually allow you to grow into the image of Christ. And this will allow you to be an instrument of God's grace until the end. Cardinal Bernardin is famous for opening every meeting with the first line of the prayer attributed to St. Francis. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. It's not a bad message to take from the Passion. Being attentive to God's presence, forming ourselves over time, letting the Spirit form us over time into the image of Christ, so that we may be full and complete instruments of God's peace. Amen.